Hi guys, and welcome to another review video. In this week's video I'll be having a look at the 24 set of Faber Castell Pitt Pens. As always, all opinions are my own, so we'll start by taking a look at the packaging and the pens themselves. Then we'll take a look at the colours in the set and what kind of techniques you can use with them. And then after that I'll be demonstrating these pens in a Speedpaint whilst talking about the product specifics. So let's get right to it, starting off with the packaging. So the packaging was what struck me when I first saw these pens in my local office supply store, which is where I bought them. They come in this gorgeously solid, heavy feeling cardboard box, and it has a real quality edge to it. The box is also entirely shrink wrapped, but of course that's since long gone, since I've been playing around with these pens in my sketchbook. There's not much to glean from this outer sleeve. It says 24 Pitt Artist Pens, brush, pigmented India ink, that they're fine artist quality, which unfortunately doesn't really mean anything these days, as I've seen it on budget and kids quality products. I'm not sure if you can see it here, but it also says made in Germany, and there's a guarantee if you are not satisfied with the product they'll send you a replacement. Those, I think, are much more meaningful words than finest artist quality, in my opinion. And on the back there is a swatch of the 24 colours that are included in this set, along with the numbers of each colour and their lightfast ratings, which is depicted here by stars, and they do correspond to the Blue Wall scale, and I'll leave a link to where you can find that information in the description box down below. There's also similar information here as on the front: pigmented India ink, high light fastness, waterproof, permanent, odourless, acid-free, pH neutral, and available in 60 colours. These are all great. This means that they are archival and you shouldn't have much problem with them in terms of fading. Although I can see there is one pen out of this 24 set that is only rated a 1 star, which is not light fast enough in my opinion. Taking a look inside the box now, once again I just want to reiterate how lovely this box feels. It's made out of thick cardboard and has a leather-esque plastic finish to it, and a magnetic closure, and I think this makes it a perfect item to travel with. It's going to be fairly waterproof and unlikely to spill its contents, and you can also bend this lid back to form a sort of stand for the box, which makes it easier to pull out the colours you want. There also is this ribbon which you can pull to pull out the bottom tray, slightly, not very much, but that also makes it easier to reach the bottom ones compared to top ones. So my only complaint about this box is that it's far too easy to stand upright, and if you do that then all the ink settles to the bottom of the pen and the ink flow isn't very good, and it actually says on the pen itself to store it horizontally. On each pen it's printed with all the information that you can find on the cardboard sleeve essentially, which I think is really useful considering most people will throw away that cardboard sleeve as soon as they open the box. And it also has the colour name, the number, and the lightfast rating on the pen, as well as a B on both the barrel and the cap, and this is to denote that it's a brush tip marker, and that's because the Pitt pens come in a range of nib sizes and types. This is the brush tip. I find that the cap colour and the barrel colour is pretty close in terms of representation of the ink, so you don't necessarily need to have a swatch handy when using these pens, although I always recommend it. I really appreciate that the colour name is printed on the pens. A lot of companies neglect that, and it's really important for people who are colourblind, for example, to be able to read them. This one I'm not so keen on. It's very difficult to read, and I think there's a red as well that's really difficult to read. These two colours, I find the contrast is a bit hard to read. It's a little bit easier on camera than it is in real life actually, but perhaps that could be improved. But I think these are fairly minor complaints given the quality of the pens. There were a couple of other things included in the packaging. One was just showing you how to use the ribbon that comes in these gift box sets, and the other thing is a leaflet, which I'll quickly flick through now so you guys can have a look at what's inside the leaflets, just making sure that it's in focus. And I won't spend too long on each page because you guys can pause the video if you want to read. That's the set that I have. Does not bleed through paper, available in different nib sizes for linear and extensive drawing. This is the whole list of colours that the pens are available in. And these are the different kinds of pens they offer. I love these kinds of leaflets. It's really inspiring to look at all the different drawings and techniques that are used. These metallic ones were quite tempting as well, just because they're metallic and I love all things shiny. And an interesting thing to note is that these pens also come in sets of 6 of varying colours, so if you want to try some out without having to spend as much money, you could try one of these smaller sets out first. And it also means that you can add to your collection if you wanted to increase a particular range of colours. The gift box, or studio box rather, sets come in 12, 24, that must be 36. Oh no, that's probably 48 actually, and that's 60. And a 60 set in a sort of display case, which looks very fancy. So now on to the testing of the techniques that I will use in my demonstration. So the first technique I tried was blending, which is where you apply colour and layer and mix the next right on top of the first whilst it's still wet. They blend very smoothly together, and although this cheap watercolour paper really isn't very good quality and quickly pilled when I rubbed over areas of the paper that were still wet with ink, I don't think I've seen any other water-based pens blend quite as well as these ones. I was thoroughly impressed, particularly by the yellow to blue gradient on the right that I've done here, and you can see that the pen applies smoothly and the pen strokes aren't visible, unlike cheaper water-based markers. So the next technique that I try is layering, and this is where you apply separate layers of ink to the paper, allowing each layer to thoroughly dry before applying the next one. And this seems to work very well if you're using paper that can't handle much abuse, the kind of abuse that you'd get from the previous technique. But even so, the transitions won't be seamless when using this technique. However, by doing this you can achieve quite a good range of saturation from just one pen, owing to the great transparency of these pens. I can count 4 or 5 different shades that you can get from a single colour if you layer it up. So the next technique that I tried was to activate the ink with water. You have to be quite quick with this because the ink only dissolves in water whilst it's still fresh on the page. It becomes very waterproof as soon as it's allowed to dry, but you can get beautiful watercolour wash effects with this technique. And similarly, you can also apply the ink with a brush if you scribble the pen on a palette or another piece of plastic, ceramic or glass, and then you can lift the ink with a damp brush. This also allows you to mix your own colours, meaning that you are certainly not limited to the 24 colours in this set. You can also get very pale nuances with this method, which opens up all sorts of possibilities for subject matter and subtle shading and blending. The next one I tried was the splatter technique, which is where you flick the tip of a wet brush against the nib of the pen. You can also lift pigment directly from the pen to a brush by doing this as well, and this makes for some cool textures, but I'm not really sure how technically useful this effect would be. And in the bottom left hand corner here I do a quick test to see how compatible these pens are with other inks. So I drew out lines using a black Pitt pen, one from this set, a ballpoint pen, a water-based pigment fine liner and an alcohol-based marker. and I'm pleased to say that these brush pens don't seem to dissolve any of those kinds of pens, and I think the only smudge came from the ballpoint pen, which had kind of globbed on the paper a little bit and it wasn't fully dry. So this is great news if you'd like to use these pens to colour in line work or to use in colouring books, for example. And finally, the tip-to-tip method, which is where you carefully put the nibs of two pens together and allow the ink from one to flow to the tip of the other. This results in a gradient effect on the nib, but it seems to be fairly uncontrollable. You can do this technique to much greater effect with alcohol-based markers. Perhaps alcohol ink flows better, I'm not really quite sure, but it doesn't seem to work quite as well with these water-based India ink pens. But the nibs did not stain from this technique and were quickly returned to their original state after scribbling on the paper a little bit. Anyway, moving on to the most exciting bit, the speed paint. So as you might be able to see, I've sketched out a peacock here on an A5 size sheet of Canson Moulin du Roi hot press watercolour paper. I wanted to use smooth and good quality paper for this piece to try and reduce the chance of pilling as much as possible. I chose a peacock as the subject matter as the colour selection seemed to be well suited for it, with a good selection of blues and greens. On the other hand, this 24 set seems to be a little light on the oranges, with only one, unless you count the flesh colour as some kind of orange, but I don't think it would be too difficult to blend and mix a different shade of orange, because the set comes with a good range of yellows and reds. So for this drawing I start off with using some washes of colour to layer in some of the lightest values, and I did this by scribbling on a plastic palette and lifting the ink up with a brush. And then once I've got in those pale colours, I move on to using the pen directly onto the paper and using a damp brush to disperse some of the pigments. I love the fact that these pens are so waterproof, as it allows me to layer up without being too concerned about lifting previous detail. One thing to be advised is that the inks do seem to feather slightly, resulting in edges that aren't very crisp. In regards to how much this set cost me 520 Norwegian kroner from my local Staples, which I think is incredibly reasonable given the cost of art supplies here, and that equates to about $65 or about £50 British. And my stepdad and I went halves in on this set, so it's a half present from him and half a present to myself. On Amazon you can find this 24 set for £41 on the UK site and $54 on the US site. Once again, I am not sponsored by Amazon or Staples, it's just a convenient place that most people have access to, and of course they might be found cheaper elsewhere. Anyhow, for a water-based pen this is on the expensive side, and you can find similar products at a lower price. For example, the Sakura Koi colouring brush pen springs to mind, and from what I've looked at a glance, it seems like a similar size set would cost you about 2/3 of the price of the Pitt pen set. But the difference in what you're paying for with the Pitt pens is that the ink inside them is pigment based as opposed to dye based, meaning that they are far more lightfast. There's only one colour in this set that isn't considered lightfast, which is the light yellow glaze, and the colours in pigment based products tend to be purer and less likely to muddy when mixing them together. Like I said earlier, the largest available set of these brush pens is the 60 set, but there's a whole range of similar pens in this line, from fine liners to metallic pens, calligraphy pens, you name it. Pigments used in these pens have been matched to other Faber Castell products, including the Pitt Pastels, Polychromos colour pencils, and the Albrecht Dürer watercolour pencils. It's worth noting though that the colours from this pen set do not match equally sized sets in the other mediums. For example, the 24 Polychromos set and this set do not contain the same range of colours, and by extension the 60 Polychromos set that I own doesn't contain some of the colours in this Pitt pen set. But anyway, the colours are matched pretty closely. I'll show the swatch sheet again at the end so you can see, and I've swatched out some of the colour pencils next to the swatches of the Pitt pens, and the colour pencils are a little bit more saturated than the pens, but other than that they seem very similar indeed. One of the challenges that I faced when drawing this was that the pens did seem to feather slightly, and so I ended up using some of my Polychromos on this picture towards the end in order to sharpen up some of the detail and texture, as well as to adjust some highlights. Usually for these reviews I only stick to one medium, or the one that I am reviewing, but considering this product is designed with the other Faber Castell products in mind, I figured it would be reasonable to use them in conjunction with each other, and they work absolutely wonderfully together. The pencils offer a little bit more control and texture, but complement the pens very well. I really love these pens because they're so juicy and vibrant, and the fairly firm fibre tip is easily controlled yet offers a good variation in line weight. I think that these would be perfect for quickly adding colour to sketchbook studies, or because they are high quality and light fast, they'd be excellent for using on finished artwork too. I really like the idea of using these pens as a way to block in colour and then using coloured pencil to refine. Overall, I'm really pleased with how this drawing turned out. I was a bit apprehensive about what I wanted the outcome to look like, but I'm pleased with this mix of illustrative and realistic. I didn't really want to spend a hugely long time on the detailed feathers and repeating patterns, so I went for a more impressionistic sort of loose style. And I'm not sure if this piece is entirely finished. I quite fancy painting in the background with metallic gold watercolour, so be sure to follow me on my social media to see if and when I add that in. To summarise, I really love these pens and think they are well worth the money if you're interested in a medium to complement your colour pencils, or are interested in branching out into new mediums in general. As I said earlier, I can certainly see myself using these a lot in my sketchbook and to take with me when I'm out and about, and I don't think there's anything that I'd want to change about these pens. I think they're perfect the way they are. Oh, and before I forget, here is the swatch where I added the colour pencil colours that match the pens, and as you can see they're pretty close. The one that's the most different is, excuse the tape, the dark indigo. It's quite a bit more saturated and yes, less grey looking than the pen, whereas the other ones I think are pretty accurate, pretty close, just a little bit more saturated. But before I wrap this video up, there's a couple of things that I wanted to mention. Once again, I'm so sorry that this video is up a couple of days late. Like last time, I've been very busy with work. I've also been a bit tired and not very well, but I didn't want to rush this drawing or video for you guys. But the other far more exciting thing that I wanted to mention is that I've now set up a Discord chat server for you guys, so you can chat to each other, talk to me, ask questions, as well as get critique and feedback on your own drawings. The link to it is in the description box down below. I'd love it if you could pop in and say hi. Thank you so much for watching this video. Let me know in the comments if you own these pens, or perhaps if you're considering buying them. And as always, I'm always available to answer questions, reply to comments, and I'm also open to video suggestions. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't already, that would mean the world to me. And check me out on my social media for more frequent art updates, sketchbook doodles, and sneak peeks on what I'm working on. Have a lovely week, and I'll see you in the next video.